Welcome back to another FPL Best Wildcard Team for Gameweek 30, and this is the updated version, and I'll be taking into account the double Gameweek 34 confirmed fixtures and also discussing how the free hit in Gameweek 34 could impact your wildcard squad in Gameweek 30. From the get-go, I'll show you a team for if you have the free hit available and you're planning on using it in Gameweek 34, and I'll also discuss later on, if you don't have the free hit, how you could tackle double Gameweek 34 and 37 with the same wildcard in Gameweek 30. There's also much more content such as my chip strategy guide and transfer plans video and podcast. You can check that out. There's also my team selection, both transfer tips videos and podcasts, and the original best wildcard team. And there's also potentially going to be a final team selection if there is a change in my transfer plans, and there also could be fantasy challenge content. If you want to see all of that, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's get this video to the 200 likes and leave a 5-star review on Spotify and Amazon Music. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. This could be a risky pick, especially for a goalkeeper, as Robert Sanchez is nearing a return, which could result in Petrovic being demoted to the bench. But if Petrovic can stay in that Chelsea team, he could offer tremendous value for a goalkeeper from now until the end of the season, and there's a possibility of back-to-back doubles in Gameweek 36 and 37, and if that doesn't happen, Chelsea could actually have a triple game week in 37, but most likely it'll be a double in either Gameweek 35 or 36, closely followed by a confirmed double in Gameweek 37, and I wouldn't mind going for 2 or 3 Chelsea players, and if you have the free hit in Gameweek 34, it allows you to go for the likes of Gusto, Palmer, and potentially a third Chelsea option like Jackson up front, or Petrovic in goal, and my preference is with the goalkeeper in Petrovic. Just bear in mind that with Gusto, he's also at risk with Reece James knocking on the door and nearing a return, and the same goes for Petrovic in goal, so that could be a slight issue further down the road. But my second goalkeeper is a quite simple one. He's going to double in Gameweek 37, and his team have arguably the best fixtures from now until the end of the campaign, and that's Dubravka. But if you are also looking at Trippier, Schär or Lascelles and going for that double up in Newcastle defensively, that might be an issue because Newcastle have been quite poor defensively, especially in this calendar year, and ever since Nick Pope got injured, Newcastle have really struggled to win games and also to keep clean sheets. But I do like these two goalkeepers if you are free hitting in Gameweek 34. Otherwise, this could look very different, as I'll show you later on in this podcast. Malo Gusto was withdrawn from the France under-23 squad due to illness, and that's why he's flagged in FPL. Both Sanchez and Reece James could cause problems with this wildcard squad, and it could make Petrovic and Gusto potentially risky FPL options, and you could go for some alternatives. So instead of Gusto, you can go for Richards, especially for those that aren't free hitting in Gameweek 34, and instead of Petrovic, you could go for Onana, who doubles in Gameweek 37 and has great fixtures just before that. But I do like this Chelsea defensive double up in the long term because of those two doubles coming up and the quality of fixtures for Petrovic and Gusto, who could really perform to a high level and get those FPL points in the process. But the second defender I'm going to go for is an interesting one because he can be very useful for non-free hitters in Gameweek 34, but I still like Aït-Nouri for Gameweek 32, 33, and I just think he's by far the best Wolves option right now, especially with Cunha currently injured. Hwang Hee-chan also could miss Gameweek 34, and Pedro Neto is likely to miss the remainder of the season. But I think Aït-Nouri could offer some good value even in that double against Arsenal and Bournemouth. One clean sheet is possible against Bournemouth, and potentially some attacking returns or some bonus points. If he gets any attacking returns, he's very likely to get in amongst those bonus points in my opinion, and I do like Aït-Nouri as a cheap option and an enabler. Now the third defender I'm going for, and once again I have to stress this is a Gameweek 34 free hit specific team, otherwise some of these players certainly wouldn't make it, and a doggy is one of them. I have gone for him because of the value he offers, and if you were to go for Pedro Porro, it would make this team even more difficult to afford. But if you have extra money in the bank and you have more team value than I, then you could go for Pedro Porro instead of a doggy. That is completely up to you, but I think just to make this team a bit more accessible in terms of budget, and it's already kind of pushing the limits, I would go for Destiny or doggy. But I'm also going to go for another budget defender here, someone I had early in the season, and that's Jamal Lascelles, who will now come back into the Newcastle team with Sven Botman missing the remainder of the season and potentially the rest of the calendar year. So hopefully he recovers very soon, but Lascelles could be a great option at 3.9 million, especially with Newcastle's fixtures and their double in Gameweek 37 against Brighton at home and Manchester United away. Of course, that isn't fully confirmed yet, but that should be the case, and we should get confirmation in the next couple of weeks. And the final defender is really to tackle these fixtures that are coming up for Manchester City from Gameweek 32 until 38, and I'm going for Nathan Ake, but rotation is always going to be an issue for Manchester City, especially the defenders, so you could go for a Kanji instead, or another defender like Kyle Walker once he returns from injury, but I have gone for Nathan Ake, and maybe if you weren't free hitting in Gameweek 34, I would actually discard the Man City defenders for now, and maybe reintroduce them later in the season when we have a clear idea of who's going to start in the Premier League. But this defensive five is quite different to previous wildcard editions. There's no Arsenal defensive coverage, which might seem crazy, but once again, it all depends on if you're free hitting in Gameweek 34 or if you don't have the chip at all. For FPL managers with a bench boost, Salah could become a sell around Gameweek 35 or 36, but for the time being, don't go without Salah if possible, and by Gameweek 31 against Sheffield United at home, Salah is practically essential. If he starts that game, he is so likely to get bonus points, a massive haul, probably a double-digit return, and you don't want to go without him for the next two game weeks. I might have to sacrifice Gameweek 30 and not go for Salah, and instead take the -4 hit and take the plunge and bring him in for Gameweek 31, but honestly, Salah for me is probably the best option from now until Gameweek 35. Then he becomes potentially a sell, but it all depends on your bench boost strategy if you have the chip in the first place and if you're looking to use it in Gameweek 37, but I wouldn't overcomplicate it with Salah. Buy him in with your transfers, even for a -4 hit, and especially on the wild card. The second midfielder is Phil Foden, and he was quite disappointing in the England games, but then again, England were quite underwhelming in general, and I do like Foden for Manchester City. He's been incredible this season, especially in the big games. After that fixture against Arsenal, I would expect them to still pick it up against Aston Villa, and those fixtures, like I mentioned with Ake earlier, are fantastic. I would argue that Man City have the best set of fixtures for the last 6-7 game weeks of the season, and Phil Foden and Haaland up front is probably the ideal Man City double up. You don't even need to go for a third player, but if you were to do so, I would recommend a defender, but it's just about nailing that on and having that defender start in both games in double Gameweek 37 and when you need them most with those plum fixtures just beforehand. Now the third midfielder is Cole Palmer. He's essential in my opinion on the wildcard, no matter what chip you use, no matter what your strategy is. I think Cole Palmer is an absolute must buy for Gameweek 30 if you don't have him already. He's got 2 doubles pending for the season. If not, it's going to be potentially a triple game week in 37, and those fixtures are insane in terms of quality, and Palmer offers the best value in the game right now, especially in the midfield. Now there's 2 midfielder slots left. This is where things get very interesting, but just like the last Wildcard Team video and podcast, I'm going to go for Bukayo Saka. He is currently flagged due to injury and he is still a doubt for Gameweek 30, but I'm still confident he'll be available, and in the nose, like Team News and Ticks indicate, that Saka will be fit. And after that, Arsenal have Luton Town at home and a double in Gameweek 34. But I have to say, if you are free hitting in Gameweek 34, Saka is less essential. And if there was one midfielder to kind of part ways with, I think Saka might be the one you sacrifice. Although in other game weeks, even Everton at home for the final day of the season, or against Bournemouth at home in Gameweek 36, you would want Saka, but you have to make sacrifices, especially if you're looking to bench boost in Gameweek 37. The final midfielder is Heung-min Son. It's kind of an awkward one with Son because he has a great fixture this week and also against Nottingham Forest in a couple of weeks' time. But from Gameweek 33, you've got Newcastle away, a blank in Gameweek 34, and then you've got some very poor fixtures. But Spurs could double in Gameweek 36 alongside Chelsea and then have another double in Gameweek 37. And just like with Chelsea, Spurs have a 5% chance of having a triple game week in 37, and that could make Heung-min Son the best triple captaincy option for the season. But I like this midfield 5. It's ideally the one you want to go for. It's the 5 best midfielders in terms of value, points potential, and fixtures, but you might have to make some sacrifices, especially around Gameweek 35 and 36. If you need a budget forward, look no further than Moniz. I know Chris Wood and Carlton Morris offer good value and they're still good options, but I'd rather go for Moniz, who's even cheaper. He has better fixtures and significantly better form. I think Moniz is the 3rd best forward in terms of if you're looking for that enabler who allows you to go for Salah, Son, Saka, Foden and all these players in the midfield alongside a premium up front. But I'd also go for Dominic Solanke. he's going to double in Gameweek 34, and Bournemouth's fixtures turn around Gameweek 35. That's when you could sell Solanke to Højlund. I think that's the perfect time to make such a move, but for the meanwhile, I'd go for Solanke, and I'd argue he's the second best forward in the game due to fixtures and that double in Gameweek 34. But if you are free hitting in Gameweek 34, I think the need for Solanke does decrease quite significantly, and he's not as important. But for those that don't have the free hit, definitely include Solanke in there. He's a great option in the forward line. He's probably my favourite forward who doubles in Gameweek 34 as well. And the final forward is Erling Haaland, who will double in Gameweek 37, and Man City's fixtures are tremendous. Even the next two games, I would expect the likes of Haaland and Foden to perform quite well against Arsenal, and if not, certainly against Aston Villa. And this front three looks very solid, but it's worth mentioning that in Gameweek 37, only Erling Haaland in this forward line will be quite useful. You have to book in some transfers later in the season. You could do Solanke to Højlund, as I mentioned earlier, and you could also upgrade Manice to Isak, which might require downgrading Salah around Gameweek 35 and 36, as I'll show you later on using FPL Team. So that's the 50-man squad. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and let's now move on to show you the starting 11 and the captaincy for Gameweek 30. In goal, I'd go for Petrovic at home to Burnley and double up on Chelsea with Gusto, and go for Udogie and Lascelles as the back three. I don't think the defence looks particularly great for this week, but in the long term it will certainly pay off. And in the midfield we've gone for Salah, Foden, Palmer and Son, and a front three of Haaland, Solanke and Manice with Dubravka, Saka, Ake and Aït-Nouri on the bench. It's not going to be too often that I'll recommend benching Saka, but I think it's worth it against Manchester City away. Even if he produced a return, I don't think his ceiling will be particularly high. I'd be very happy to be proven wrong there, but I would prefer Manice over Saka in Gameweek 30. And in terms of the captaincy, it's between Palmer, Son and Salah. I think the closer I get to the deadline, the more tempted I am by Palmer, but if I had Salah, I'd undoubtedly go for him this week, and maybe it's between Palmer and Son as the second best option for Gameweek 30 in terms of the captaincy. The expected points is 57.7, and I've got 0.4 million in the bank. If you can't afford this squad, you have to make some sacrifices, which could include Aït-Nouri downgraded to Richards, who's priced at 3.9 million, and you could also make a few other alterations here and there. Maybe you can downgrade Ake and go to an even cheaper defender, maybe someone from Everton for example. But if you are free hitting in Gameweek 34, I wouldn't really recommend these Everton assets, and Pickford's probably the best to cover the defence, and overall he's probably the best Everton asset period. But there's a few things you can do here and there. Even Saka could be downgraded, and you could make that sacrifice as early as Gameweek 30, but it could backfire, especially in Gameweeks like 31 and 36 when Arsenal host Luton Town and Bournemouth. But what I'm going to do with this wildcard team is show you how it would look in future game weeks, some rough plans you could do in terms of future transfers, and how the free hit in 34 could look like, and also the bench boost in Gameweek 37. And then afterwards I'll show you the alterations depending on if you don't have the free hit or you don't want to use it in Gameweek 34, and how that impacts the Gameweek 30 wildcard team. So in Gameweek 31, the team could look like this: Dubravka in goal, Lascelles doubling up there with that Newcastle defence at home to Everton, Ake and Aït-Nouri completing the back line, Salah, Foden, Palmer, Son and Saka as the midfield five, with Haaland and Solanke up front, and every single player except Aït-Nouri has a home fixture. Then you've got Petrovic, Manice, Gusto and Udogie on the bench, and the expected points is 66.4, with Salah as the overwhelming favourite for the captaincy and Saka as the vice at home to Luton Town. In Gameweek 32, you can go for this with Petrovic in goal away to Sheffield United, and you can double up on Chelsea here with Malo Gusto, and then go for Nathan Ake and Udogie, all with pretty good fixtures on paper. The same midfield five as always, and then Haaland and Solanke up front yet again, with the bench being Dubravka, Manice, Aït-Nouri and Lascelles. And of course you can change the starting 11 and the captaincy to your liking. The expected points is quite strong yet again with 63.6. Then in Gameweek 33, and remember you can use transfers in this period, so you don't need to burn transfers as I'm showing you right here. You can go for Petrovic in goal once again at home to Everton, go for Aït-Nouri, Ake and Gusto as the back three, the same midfield five and the same front line with Haaland and Solanke, and the bench is pretty much the same as it was in the previous game week. The captaincy could be shared between Haaland or Salah. You could also consider a differential in Palmer, but I think Haaland at home to Luton Town is the best captaincy option. He scored 5 goals the last time he played the Hatters in the FA Cup, and the expected points is even higher at 67.2. Then in Game Week 34, remember this is provisional and this could certainly change, and I've got Elise in there depending on if he's fit by Game Week 34. If not, you can go for Munoz instead, or change the structure, and instead of Van Dijk, you go for Munoz in the starting 11 and you go for 2 Liverpool midfielders in Luis Diaz and Salah. So remember, this is a provisional free hit draft. It depends on if Elise is fit, but we've gone for Pickford in goal, Van Dijk, Aït-Nouri and White, and then a midfield 5 of Salah, Elise, Eze, Odegaard and Saka, and then Darwin and Solanke up front. And the bench also looks very strong, of course. It's pretty much full of double game week players because it is a free hit, and you could even go for some single game week options, Dalot, Højlund against Sheffield United at home, and you also have some alternatives like Haaland and Foden against Brighton away, and there's plenty more where that came from. You don't need to fill your entire starting 11 with double game week players, but the expected points is very high at 108, and it increases to 113.2 if I put Munoz in for Elise. And remember, you can go about things a bit differently in terms of your structure. You can also go for Havertz instead of Odegaard, or even Martinelli. There's a lot you could change with this provisional free hit team. There's still a long way to go from now until that deadline. Then in Game Week 35, you can go for this setup. Remember, you're wildcarding in 30, you free in Game Week 34, and you've still got this solid platform for the remainder of the season with Dubravka and Lascelles at home to Sheffield United. Then you've got Nathan Ake and Aït-Nouri as the back three, the same midfield 5 as always, Salah, Foden, Palmer, Son and Saka, and a front 2 of Haaland and Højlund. The first transfer I've made, and remember you can make some transfers beforehand and not burn them as I've shown you with these examples, and the bench is still solid with Petrovic, Muniz, Gusto and Udogie. The expected points isn't too high, but I think it will increase as we approach that deadline as well. Then in Game Week 36, you could have this setup with 3 doublers for Chelsea and also 2 from Tottenham Hotspur. You can even add a third. I'm not even using this free transfer we have available. You could go for Maddison or Richarlison to double up on the Spurs attack. So you have plenty of options here. Even Pedro Porro could come in for you, but I would recommend going for a Spurs midfielder instead and not doubling up on their defence. You've gone for Petrovic at home to Tottenham and West Ham, Gusto, Ake and Udogie facing Chelsea away and Liverpool away. Not a great double, and that's even more reason to double up on the attack and not the defence. Heung-min Son, Salah, Foden, Palmer, Saka, and then Haaland and Højlund up front. The captaincy, I think Palmer's the best option, and I'd probably put Son as the vice, and the bench is pretty much the same as the previous weeks. It's not looking that great, but you have plenty of squad depth there if needed. Then in Game Week 37, you could build this bench boost team for a -4 hit, and you don't even need to take hits. Remember, if you make the transfers earlier and you don't burn them, you could actually prevent this -4 hit from ever taking place. You can go for an entire starting 11 full of double game week players, and you could still keep the likes of Salah if you wish, but there is so much potential here with the bench boost in Game Week 37 for most FPL managers, and that's why I recommend to most people to also consider doing it and free hitting in Game Week 34 instead. I think Spurs blanking in 34 makes the bench boost far more appealing in Game Week 37, but that is certainly team dependent. The expected points would definitely increase to over 100 once the double game weeks are confirmed and they're fully official. Then in Game Week 38, we can't forget this game week. You still have a very solid platform with 3 Spurs players away to Sheffield United. You've also gone for Petrovic, Gusto and Palmer at home to Bournemouth, and you also have Ake at home to West Ham, Son, Salah, Foden, and also Haaland and Højlund up front. And you can make one single transfer to improve this team. Maybe you want Saka at home to Everton, or Arsenal coverage in general. You can go for Gabriel in for Ake or Gusto, and you could also go for Saka, and you might need to sell someone like Foden, which isn't ideal, but there are so many possibilities with this wildcard team in Game Week 30. Now the big issue is that with all this planning and how great this team could look every single game week, injuries happen, suspensions, some players become rotation risk, and Manchester City definitely leap out as a big concern, especially Nathan Ake, so definitely keep an eye out for it, and this could certainly change. Even Petrovic and Gusto might not be safe, and that's why you can go for alternatives that I've discussed throughout this video and podcast. But now let's actually move on to the Game Week 30 wildcard team with some alterations based on if you don't have the free hit or you're not planning on using it in Game Week 34. We are back to this game week once again, and we've only got 0.3 million in the bank, with this squad, so it's slightly more expensive than the last one, only a 0.1 million difference of course, but like I mentioned earlier, some of you might struggle to afford this. I was actually pretty much pushing the limits with my own team value and budget, but I've gone for Petrovic in goal at home to Burnley, then Munoz comes in for Gusto, and also Connor Bradley, but this is a risky pick I think with Connor Bradley. He might become a rotation risk from Game Week 32 onwards, which is when Trent Alexander-Arnold could return, and in the FA Cup, Trent wasn't even available and it was Joe Gomez starting at right back, which was quite surprising to me, but Bradley is a great option for the next two games specifically. I've also gone for Lascelles yet again, and also Gabriel comes in, and also Aït-Nouri, they're sitting on the bench. The midfield four is Salah, Foden, Palmer and Son, and the front three is pretty much the same as before with Haaland, Solanke and Muniz, and I've got Pickford there as the backup goalkeeper instead of Martin Dubravka, and the expected points I believe is slightly lower than the other wildcard team I showed you, but it all depends on your free hit strategy in Game Week 34 as well. In Game Week 31, you could also have this setup with Pickford in goal, although both him and Petrovic have poor fixtures on paper in this game week. You could also go for Bradley, Gabriel and Aït-Nouri as the back three, the same midfield five as always, and the same front two with Muniz first on your bench. Also Munoz away to Bournemouth, second on your bench, and Lascelles last. And the expected points is very high at 72.8. But I want to briefly recap over the other game weeks because I want to place more emphasis on the major doubles like Game Week 34 and 37, and also the likelihood of Game Week 36 having a double between Chelsea and Tottenham. Those are the main game weeks to look out for, and this team will look very solid in every single game week, just like the other wildcard teams. So in Game Week 32, it looks very solid once again. The captaincy is quite close here between Son, Salah and Erling Haaland. And then if we go to Game Week 33, still a very solid platform. Remember, you can use free transfers, so if Bradley is now becoming a rotation risk by this point, you can sell him. You've got 0.3 million in the bank, and you might have to make another move to increase the funds available to make a bigger upgrade in that position. Then in Game Week 34, you could have this squad without using the free hit. So you've got Pickford in goal at home to Nottingham Forest and Liverpool, Aït-Nouri at home to Arsenal and Bournemouth, Bradley away to Fulham and Everton, and just like I said earlier, you could make an upgrade here, and we've got 4 million in the bank, so Bradley could actually be upgraded to Virgil van Dijk directly. Then Gabriel away to Wolves and Chelsea at home, Munoz with 2 home fixtures against West Ham and Newcastle, then Salah as the captain, Foden, Saka, Eze, and a front two of Haaland and Solanke, and the bench is also decent, and you don't want it to be too good of course because you don't want some bench points there. Unfortunately, I mean, you could even bench boost here, but I really wouldn't be looking at doing it because as you'll see very soon, Game Week 37 looks incredible for the bench boost, especially if you're wildcarding in Game Week 35, and we have 2 single game week players in the starting 11, but it's Foden and Haaland away to Brighton. That doesn't look too bad to me whatsoever, and the expected points is 108.2. That's not too far off the free hit team I showed you, the provisional one, which had around 113 expected points. I would be intrigued to see your thoughts in terms of which strategy do you prefer, free hitting in Game Week 34 or not. So do you prefer this wildcard squad I'm talking about or the original one, which includes a free hit for Game Week 34? But I think both of them will score very highly indeed, and the Game Week 30 wildcard will be a success. In Game Week 35, another solid platform. You've got a very solid starting 11, and pretty much you've got that foundation for the rest of the season in place. In Game Week 36, you can have that triple up in Chelsea. Only one Spurs asset, but you could go for a second one if you wish. So an attacker, or maybe a Doggy or Pedro Porro. You could even take a -4 hit to make that happen, and it looks very solid to say the least. Then in Game Week 37, you have this bench boost team potentially for a -8 hit, but you could take fewer hits or use the other transfers earlier, so you don't have to take these hits later on in the season, as I mentioned earlier with the other squad. But this would still look very solid. The expected points I believe is identical to the other wildcard squad, but it would be for an extra hit, so just bear that in mind. And this looks really good. That bench should easily score a lot of points. You could also put Gabriel there. You know, people always tend to put the weakest players, so to speak, on the bench boost. It doesn't really matter. That could still do very well. But of course, I'm not going to lie, this bench boost doesn't look as strong as the other one. And that's where the free hit Game Week 34 could help you. And if I'm being honest, that Game Week 35 wildcard into the 37 bench boost makes it so easy to get a full 50-man squad who have a double game week. And you could make some transfers earlier with this Game Week 30 wildcard team to make it possible and fill your team completely of double game week players. Then in Game Week 38, you have this solid platform yet again, and you also have more flexibility with 2.9 million in the bank, but the main issue is no Mohamed Salah, and you could make that possible by taking a -4 hit to downgrade either Isak or Højlund to a Manice, and then upgrade one of Palmer, Saka, Foden or Son to Salah. But selling one of those midfielders for a -4 hit doesn't sit right with me, and you might have to call it a day and not go for Mohamed Salah in Gameweek 38, or you sacrifice the bench boost even more in Gameweek 37. But that's all about your preference and how you want to tackle all these double game weeks, and also taking into account your chip strategies. If you don't have the bench boost, then you don't even need to worry about filling your 50-man squad full of these great players with double game weeks in 34 or 37. That doesn't need to be a big issue. So all of these chips definitely play a part in your strategy from now until the end of the season. But for those with the free hit and bench boost available, I've covered both kind of scenarios if you're free hitting in Gameweek 34 or not, and how that impacts your Gameweek 30 wildcard. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's get this video to the 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 23k subscribers and beyond. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, for the latest FPL and UCL fantasy updates. Check the Discord server, the FPL League, Draft Hound, and also Spotify and Amazon Music. Follow me on those platforms and leave a 5-star review. You can also become a patron or a channel member to support the channel even further. A huge shout out goes to those that have done so already. I wish you all the best of luck for Gameweek 30 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.